My name is Lauren Price, and the day I brought my daughter into the world, my father-in-law brought divorce papers instead of flowers. I was still damp with sweat and joy when the door cracked open and a shadow widened across the tile. It should have been a bouquet, something cheerful, balloons maybe, a clumsy bear wearing "It's a Girl," but the figure stepping in wasn't carrying petals or smiles. It was Richard Hale, with his wool coat folded over one arm and an embossed leather folder gripped like a weapon in the other. Evan stood from the chair by my bed, the vinyl screeching. He looked so tired, pale, unshaven, eyes rimmed red. Behind him, our daughter made a soft kitten sound from the bassinet. Isla. The name meant calm waters, and I had begged the universe for calm. The universe sent Richard. "Congratulations," Richard said, his voice so smooth it left streaks. "A healthy girl. Good work, Lauren." I used to be polite around him. I used to tuck my working-class vowels into softer shapes, squeeze my nurse's hands together in my lap, and pretend I didn't notice the way he examined chairs before sitting, as if the world might stain him. Today, I was in a gown that snapped at the shoulder, hair plastered to my forehead, and a tenderness filled me like light. I didn't have the energy to pretend. "What's in the folder?" I asked. Richard smiled. Dimples, teeth, no warmth. A formality. He placed the folder on my rolling table, precisely between the plastic water pitcher and the nurse call button. Evan flinched. I saw his hand, knuckles angry and bruised, a scrape near his ring. He'd fought someone, or something. I followed the bruise to his eyes, to the apology crouched there. "Read," Richard said. The paper was thick and creamy, the kind rich people choose when they want the world to feel heavy. Hale and Son construction letterhead. My name. Evans. The phrase "irreconcilable differences" dressed up in legal italics, a reference to a post-nuptial agreement that did not exist in any universe where ID ever signed it. A notary stamp, a signature line waiting like an open trap. "You can't be serious," I said. "It's best for the family brand," Richard replied, as if I were a department to be reorganized. "The timing is ideal. If we move quickly, there's minimal press. You'll be comfortable and Evan can focus on the transition." My body was still humming from labor, that miraculous ache of something torn and remade. I thought of the hours I'd helped strangers deliver babies under fluorescent lights. I'd always place the swaddled child into arms with words like, "Look what you did." No one handed me a lawsuit afterward. "Richard," Evan said finally. "Dad." Richard didn't look at him. "Ms. Price understands efficiency. Nurses must." I swallowed anger so hot it tasted like coins. I never signed a postnup. Richard's brows lifted in theatrical surprise. "Then we'll attach it with your signature now. One errand, then rest. My driver is waiting. We'll take Isla home when it's sorted." He said it like I was a glitch in a software update. "Isla goes home with me," I said low. Richard's gaze slid to the bassinet, to the pink hat labeled with her last name. Hale. He liked seeing his lineage on cotton. "Families require stewardship," he murmured. "Complications are corrected for everyone's sake." Evan reached for my hand but stopped short, the bruise on his knuckles pulsing. "Lauren, don't," I whispered. I thought of my mother's apartment smelling like laundry starch, of her telling me that rich men often confuse ownership with love. I thought of how I learned to read a room in the ER, how danger has a temperature. The air was already cooling. I lifted the pages and met Richard's eyes. "You walked into a maternity ward with divorce papers." He tilted his head, all sympathy. "Better now than messier later?" The hallway sounded suddenly loud. Monitors beeping, shoes squeaking, a laugh ringing from a nurse's station. Life was happening out there. In here, someone was trying to edit mine. I placed the papers back on the folder and pushed it away, gently, as if it might bite. "No." Richard's smile didn't change, but something tightened behind it. He tapped the folder with 2 fingers like a judge calling order. "Sign fast," he said, "or you won't be taking Isla home." Richard's smile wasn't joy. It was a threat with dimples. He slid a black pen toward me as if it were a straw for the drink I'd ordered. The cap clicked off with a small pop that sounded too cheerful for the moment. I could smell his cologne, cedar and cold metal. Power always has a scent in my memory, and it never smells like bread baking. "You'll want to read the morality clause," Richard said. tapping a paragraph highlighted in tasteful yellow. It provides guidance for custody and public comportment. Public comportment? I said. Is that what you call mothering? He didn't blink. It's what the courts call risk mitigation. Evan hovered by the window, rubbing the back of his neck. His knuckles, those knuckles, kept dragging my attention like magnets. I'd seen plenty of fights in the ER and plenty of lies afterward. Whatever had happened before Richard arrived, it had not been peaceful. The door eased open. Nadia Reed, my favorite coworker, and the reason half my shift ever laughed, stepped halfway in with a bouquet pilfered from some administrative arrangement. Carnations, a few drooping daisies. She clocked the room in one glance. The folder, my face, Richard's posture. Her eyebrows said, "Want me to throw him out?" My tiny nod said, "Not yet." "Ms. Reed," Richard said pleasantly, as if he knew the names of my friends. He didn't. He was the kind of man who remembered a senator as favorite bourbon, but not the janitor S. Nadia set the flowers in a chipped vase and moved to the sink, all casual. I heard her phone vibrate against her scrubs, then go quiet. Recording, I hoped. She met my eyes. I breathed easier. Richard continued. Our attorneys have blocked numerous bad faith custody attempts. They'll handle the filings this afternoon. If you delay, Miss Price, you'll force my hand. Your hand looks pretty forced already, Nadia muttered, too low for the men. I nearly smiled. Richard flipped a page. There have been concerns about Evan's sobriety, he said, softening his voice into false compassion. Given his history, guardianship may need interim review. Evan jerked. What history? Richard gave him a glance that could frost glass. You know. No, Dad, he said, voice cracking. No, I don't. I answered before Richard could decorate the lie with another adverb. Evan's sober. He's been sober. He keeps sparkling water in the fridge and leaves parties early. He's boring in a way that saved our marriage. Richard's smile crept wider, a politician's umbrella opening. The public record suggests otherwise. Nadia pivoted. Funny how records can be organized. I moved the pen back toward him with my fingertip. I'm asking for a lawyer. You have one, Richard said smoothly. Ours is excellent. Not yours, I said. Mine. He exhaled through his nose. A tiny sound of disappointment masked as patience. Of course. But time is critical. Time is my stitches, I said. Time is my baby's first nap. His eyes cut to Isla again. It was a glance that measured, not admired. Men like him loved the idea of legacy the way a collector loves a rare coin. Beautiful, but mostly valuable because others can't have it. Nadia moved closer to the bassinet, a guardian angel in hospital clogs. You're crowding the patient, she told Richard. Step back. He did, surprisingly. Maybe he understood that cameras lived everywhere in hospitals, and that bad angles are forever. I looked at Evan. When did you hurt your hand? He stared at the bruise like he'd never seen it. Last night, he whispered. In the garage. With whom? I asked. His eyes flicked to Richard, then to me. It doesn't matter. It matters, I said. Richard cleared his throat. Evan has been under pressure. The board expects leadership without distractions. I felt the word like a slap. You mean a wife who works. A wife you can't schedule. He didn't bother denying it. The brand prefers clarity. Nadia's phone buzzed again. Once. Our code. She had what we needed. I placed my palms flat on the sheet. I'm not signing today. Richard inclined his head. Sorrow painted on. Then you're choosing the harder path. Maybe I am. Evan's voice threaded through the sterile air, thin as a cut. Lauren, maybe you should. It was so quiet in the room that I could hear the IV drip count to 3 before the next bead fell. I turned to my husband, the man who had kissed my forehead during contractions, and said, We're a team. He couldn't meet my eyes. I didn't sign, I said, my voice steady and strange in my own ears. But I heard you. I don't forget signatures, especially ones I never gave. A year ago, I came home from a 12-hour shift and found a folder like a black hole on our kitchen island. Richard sat at the head of our table, drinking my tea, as if my home were a conference room he had booked. Evan stared at the granite, hands clasped like a boy in the principal's office. It's simple, Richard had said, sliding papers toward me. A postnuptial agreement that clarifies expectations. You'll be protected. Evan will be protected. The company will avoid confusion. The clauses read like vows to a corporation: social media discretion, relocation without complaint, limited interviews, charitable appearances upon request. Then came the bright line that made the page vibrate. Employment. Spousal external employment discouraged. Upon pregnancy discontinued. The word discouraged hit a blade. I looked up. I'm a nurse, I'd said. I'm not a brand ambassador. Richard smiled. You can volunteer at our health initiatives. It'll be the same work with better photos. Evan had touched my wrist. We can talk about it, Lo. Talk about what? I'd asked. Me quitting the one thing that makes sense when everything else feels like a costume? Richard had laughed softly, forgiving me for being provincial. No one is asking you to be less. We're asking you to be more of what matters. I refused then. I walked the folder back to him with 2 fingers and said, No, thank you. My mother raised me with please and thank you, even when saying no. I assumed that courtesy would hold. He'd looked at me the way a man looks at a stubborn jar lid. Later, he would send drafts with softened language, then call Evan with escalating requests, then stop inviting us to certain dinners, then tip a gossip column toward a photo where my dress didn't fit right. Sand in the gears, pressure in the walls. I didn't sign. Standing in the hospital room now, that memory rose like a bruise touched by accident. I dialed a number I'd stored for emergencies that weren't medical. Attorney Camille Foster had once watched me stabilize her asthmatic daughter in the ER. She'd hugged me with gratitude that smelled like peppermint and panic. I'd told her to call if she ever needed me. She told me the same. Camille, I said when she answered. It's Lauren Price. Her voice tightened, the way professionals do when danger walks in. What happened? Richard Hale brought divorce papers to my delivery room, I said. There's mention of a postnup I never signed. He's hinting at custody games. Is Isla safe? Camille asked. She's sleeping, I said. For now. Do not sign anything, Camille said. Each word a nail. Photograph everything. Note names, times, threats. Ask the charge nurse to document coercion. Make copies if you can. I'll come. I glanced at Nadia, who nodded and lifted her phone like a trophy. We're recording, I said. Good, Camille replied. If he brought papers to a birthing room, he's desperate. Find out why. The why had a shape I couldn't see yet, but I recognized the edges. The way Richard S. eyes kept landing on Isla S. bracelet. The timing that turned my hospital gown into a negotiation table, the way Evan's bruised knuckles hummed with the echo of a decision. Desperation wraps itself in rules, but it still leaks. Text me the room number, Camille said. I'm on my way. When I hung up, I felt taller. Not invincible. Braver than that. Invincibility is a lie people tell to sell seminars. Bravery is moving with your fear sitting shotgun, pointing out all the exits. Richard re-entered from the hall, speaking softly into his phone. He ended the call and smiled. So? I've called my lawyer, I said. His pause was microscopic but satisfying. Of course. And I want copies, I added. Every page. Right now. He hesitated, then nodded to Evan, who took the folder like it was hot and set it on the table for the Nurse S copier. I watched him go, then watched Richard watching me. It felt like being measured for a dress I didn't order. We'll sort this quickly, Richard said, silk pooled over stone. Or correctly, I replied. He tilted his head at Isla. For her sake, I hope those are the same. Me too, I said, and meant it. He used my baby's hospital bracelet like a pair of handcuffs. The pink band around Isla S. wrist had her last name, and a barcode that chirped whenever a nurse scanned it. It also had a duplicate on my arm, linking us like a whisper chain. Richard regarded those bands with an interest that made my skin feel thin. There's an emergency petition, he said, casual as weather. Temporary custody review due to medical neglect and marital instability. I laughed, a sharp, wrong sound that startled even me. Medical neglect, I repeated, in the room where ID just delivered a healthy baby with the nurse manager bringing me ice chips like I was royalty. Richard shrugged. Courts don't like uncertainty. Our attorneys will ensure clarity. By stealing a newborn? Nadia said from her guard post. Try it and see what happens. The door opened, and nurse manager Melinda Cho stepped in. White coat crisp, eyes good at both kindness and war. She looked at Richard the way nurses look at men who think laminated visitor passes are crowns. Mr. Hale, she said evenly, You're crowding a recovery room." He smoothed his tie. "We're concluding family paperwork." Melinda came to my bedside and set a gentle hand on the rail. "Ms. Price, would you like to request a social worker?" "Yes," I said, relief washing me. "And I'd like you to note that I am being pressured to sign legal documents while medicated and postpartum." Melinda nodded. "Noted," she said. Then to Richard, "You'll find our policy on harassment very thorough." "Harassment is a strong word," he replied, smile glued on. "Then stop earning it," Nadia muttered. Richard slipped a stapled packet from his coat, another gem from his bottomless legal pocket. He tapped a section titled Morality. Words like adultery, substance abuse, public embarrassment slithered down the page. "The morality clause attaches here," he said. "To a postnup I never signed," I reminded him. He spread his hands. "The court will consider the spirit of the agreement." "The court will consider facts," Melinda said. "And this hospital will consider security if you continue." He looked past her at Isla, as if appealing directly to the one human in the room who hadn't learned words yet. "Lauren, your choices have consequences." "So do yours," I said. The hallway noise swelled again. Footsteps, a cart rattling, a baby's thin, fierce cry. Life kept reminding me it was bigger than any one man's plan. Still, my stomach tightened when the door slid open and a man in a gray suit stepped in. A folder tucked beneath his arm, a solemnity baked onto his face like fondant. "Process server," he announced, as if anyone asked. He handed me a packet with a blue ribbon clipped to it, a judge's name stamped in ink on the first page. It looked official enough to scare a city. "Thank you," Richard said smoothly, like a host accepting a coat. I took the packet with hands that did not tremble. "Thank God," and set it on my lap. Melinda remained planted by my side, a lighthouse in a storm of ties. I read quickly, the way you read instructions when a machine is beeping and you don't know which button will make it stop. Language throbbed with threat, but the details mattered. "This isn't an order," I said after a minute. "It's a filed petition. No ruling." Richard's mouth flattened. "It will be." Nadia drifted closer to Melinda, thumbs dancing in her scrub pocket. I knew that posture. Preserving timestamps, saving audio, sending files somewhere clouds could keep them. "Ms. Price," Melinda said, "would you like me to call the social worker now?" "Yes," I repeated louder. Richard exhaled like he pitied me. "There's no need to make a scene." "You made one," I said, "when you walked in with a briefcase instead of balloons." He straightened his cuffs. I brought what was necessary. No one moved for a breath. Then Richard tapped the papers again, his new nervous tick, or his old judge's gavel. "We're not finished," he murmured. "Then sit," Melinda said, gesturing at the chair farthest from Isla. Quietly, he sat, and for the first time that day, I felt the balance of the room tilt. Not by much, but enough to make standing seem possible. Then the process server, still hovering as if he were owed applause, cleared his throat and said, "There's also a notice of hearing in 72 hours. The blue ink gleamed like a bruise. I met Richard S. eyes and smiled the way you smile at a man about to trip over his own shoelaces. "Good," I said. "We like daylight." The server left. The door side shut. The stamp on the page stared up at me like a dare. Some paper is razor sharp. His was meant to bleed me dry. I laid the petition flat on the tray and photographed every page with the efficiency my job drilled into me. Charting, documenting, time-stamping. These are habits nurses carry like spare hearts. Nadia angled the blind so the light wouldn't glare. Each snap sounded like a nail going into a sturdy box. "It's not an order," I repeated, reading line by line. "It's a petition dressed for prom." Nadia grinned despite herself. "Cute dress, ugly intentions." Evan reappeared with copies of the divorce packet, edges still warm from the machine. He handed them to me without meeting my eyes. My husband, my partner, the father of the tiny miracle sleeping 3 feet away, looked like a billboard for sorrow. The bruise on his knuckles seemed darker under the fluorescent lights, a bruise that kept talking even when he didn't. "Evan," I said, "tell me the truth." He swallowed. "Dad said he can withhold my trust release if I don't fix this. He said the board needs stability. He said there's a CFO seat when the merger goes through. If I deliver a clean family narrative." I stared. "Deliver," I repeated. "Like drywall." He winced. "Lauren, I'm sorry. Are you?" Nadia asked, not unkindly, but without padding. Because your wife just had a baby and your father is staging a hostile takeover of her life in the recovery room. Evan rubbed his forehead with the heel of his uninjured hand. I told him no. I told him to wait. He wouldn't. Your knuckles tell a different story, I said. His mouth opened and closed. He said things about you. About doctors. About rumors. Nadia snorted. The rumor is your dad's allergic to women who make their own money. Melinda returned, a social worker in tow, and began documenting with the thoroughness of someone who understands courts. The social worker, a calm woman named Priya, asked questions gently and wrote answers with sharp strokes. She recorded the pressure, the timing, the mention of custody threats. She asked if I felt safe. I feel angry, I said. And clear. Richard watched this administrative chore with growing irritation, like a man trapped in traffic who thinks the laws of physics should yield to his calendar. He checked his watch. He smiled at Priya as if she were a hotel concierge. It almost worked. Nadia kept recording, her phone tucked like a secret. At one point, Richard leaned too close to me and murmured, "This could have been generous," and the microphone on Nadia's phone drank those words like champagne. I stacked the copies in neat piles and labeled them in my head. Hospital, lawyer, me. I've always believed that neatness is a kind of armor. When chaos comes, put its papers in order. Evan tried again. Lo, I'm sorry. I panicked. I looked at him until he finally met my eyes. I needed you to be my husband, I said, voice low. Not his son. He closed his eyes for a second that looked like prayer. Richard stood, gathering his coat. We'll reconvene, he announced. I've made the reasonable offer. Threat, Nadia corrected. Offer, he repeated. Melinda moved between him and the bassinet. Not another step, she said. Pleasant as a receptionist, immovable as a wall. He stopped. The ridiculous part of me wanted to laugh. This man who built towers, halted by a nurse's palm. Maybe the world did balance itself sometimes. With small victories no one photographs. I turned my head and looked at Isla. Her mouth made a perfect O, dreaming of nothing but milk and warmth. I thought of the lives that would try to lay claim to her, to draft her into a story she didn't get to write. A rage like clean fire rose in me, bright and useful. I rotated the tray so the petition faced Richard. Then I smiled. Not the polite one I learned for meetings, not the soft one I used for patients getting bad news. The other smile. The one my mother used when a landlord tried to keep our deposit, and she pulled out a notebook full of dates. Mr. Hale, I said, and let my voice carry. Thank you for the clarity. He blinked. I'll see you in court, I added, with counsel, recordings, and witnesses. Nadia's eyes sparkled. Melinda's mouth twitched. Evan looked like a man realizing the ocean is bigger than the boat he boarded. I looked at my newborn, then at Richard, and I smiled back. He called it protecting the family. I called it taking a hostage. Richard returned an hour later with the same folder and a fresh performance. I apologize for earlier, he said, voice burnished, edges sanded. I'm a grandfather now. Emotions run high. He took the chair near the door. Melinda S. rule, and crossed his legs like a judge on a magazine cover. I want peace, he said, but peace requires truth. Start there, Nadia suggested, positioning herself within microphone range. He lifted the morality page again, tapping the margin. There have been credible reports about Lauren's inappropriate associations with physicians at St. Mary's. Texts, calls at odd hours, compromised boundaries. I laughed, short and sharp. Text alerts at odd hours? That's my shift app. The one that asks me to come save lives when 2 nurses call out. Richard looked at Priya, who had returned with a second social worker for support. You see, he said gently. Patterns. Camille arrived like weather changing. A presence that made everyone check the horizon. Slate blazer, hair braided back, eyes that missed nothing. She set her bag down, took a breath of the room, and nodded at me like we'd rehearsed. Mr. Hale, she said. I'm attorney Camille Foster, counsel for Ms. Price. We'll need copies of every document you've brought, and a list of all claims you intend to submit to the court. Also, the original of any alleged postnuptial agreement, including metadata, drafts, and communications. Richard's smile faltered. You'll get what's necessary. What's necessary is everything, Camille said, unzipping a leather pad folio with a sound like a zipper closing on a trap. "We'll also need any evidence supporting your slander about my client's alleged affairs, including names, dates, and sources. If those don't exist, I'll enjoy discovering that too." He tried to meet her gaze and discovered a cliff. "Our attorneys can email me by close of business," Camille finished. "Meanwhile, this hospital room is not a deposition, and Ms. Price is not your employee." Richard leaned back, studying her. "You're very certain?" "Correct," Camille said. Nadia's phone vibrated twice. Our code forgot it. She'd captured affairs and patterns. Priya continued noting, her pen carving the afternoon into testimony. Richard found his footing again and feigned magnanimity. "Look, Lauren, we can settle this without making a show. Sign and you'll receive a generous arrangement. Privacy, comfort, freedom," I asked. He smiled. "Within reason." Camille slid a paper across the tray. "Ms. Price won't be signing anything today. She will, however, be making a discovery request." She clicked a pen. "Original post-nup. Evidence of rumors. Financial disclosures. Communications with board members regarding marital status and the proposed merger. Names of private investigators retained in the last 6 months, and any draft custody filings created before Isla's birth." He went still. It was so slight you might miss it, the way a deer pauses when the wind changes, but everyone in the room felt the temperature drop. Camille turned to me. "When bullies rush process, they're hiding a clock," she murmured. Richard shifted in his chair. "You're manufacturing drama." "No," Camille said. "I'm measuring it." He tried to regain narrative. "The company ES position is that family turmoil during a merger harms thousands of employees and jeopardizes civic projects. We'll argue accordingly." "Then bring proof," Camille replied. "And wear a good suit." Richard glanced at Isla again, as if the baby might lean his way. She slept, unimpressed. He stood with a sigh that belonged in front of a camera and reached for his coat. Camille added conversationally, "I'll be sending a preservation notice for electronic records. If anything goes missing, we'll assume intent." He smoothed his lapel. "Assume what you like." She smiled. "I prefer evidence." He moved to the door. As he opened it, Camille's voice followed him, soft enough to be almost kind. "You're hiding something bigger than her." The door eased shut. The silence that followed had shape and weight. I looked at Camille. "Bigger than me?" She nodded once. "Bigger than a post-nup. He's trying to beat a fuse." "Can we find it?" Nadia asked. Camille glanced at my daughter, then at the stacked papers, then at the bruise on Evan's hand. "We will," she said, "because men like Richard forget that women like us learn to count. Hours, doses, lies." I reached for Isla's tiny foot, warm as a secret. "Then let's start counting." Allies sometimes wear enemy colors first. The text arrived at 11:13 p.m., a number I remember because I stared at it until the digits melted. Brooke Hale. "Can we talk?" Alone. Evan's sister had always been polite to me the way expensive stores are polite to people who look like they might not buy anything. She wore the family name like tailored armor and moved through rooms as if each chair had been placed there for her. I replied, "Hospital cafeteria. 10 minutes. No Richard." Nadia walked with me, then peeled off at the vending machines with a bag of pretzels and a bored expression that fooled no one. Melinda insisted on a nurse escort anyway, so a security guard hovered at the far end of the fluorescent corridor. Even courage needs chaperones sometimes. Brooke sat at a corner table, hands clasped around a paper cup, eyes rimmed with something like sleeplessness. She stood when I approached, then sat hard, as if choosing one posture would betray secrets. "Congratulations," she said, voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. "She's beautiful." "Thank you," I said, cautious. She glanced around. "Is he here?" "Not right now," I said, "but he thinks he owns the air." Her mouth twitched. "He always has." I waited. My mother taught me the power of silence, how people pour words into it to keep from hearing themselves think. Brooke did. "He's not just pushing you out," she said, and her hands trembled for a single syllable. "He's clearing the lane." "For what?" I asked. "The merger," she said. "It's uglier than the press releases. He needs Evan. Pliable. Single. With a narrative the board can sell to the city and the banks." Nadia coughed from the vending machines. I took a breath. "Tell me straight, Brooke." She stared at the coffee like it might spell it out. We've been billing for projects that never broke ground. Pre-development services, he calls them. Ghost subcontractors. Duplicate ledgers. Dad says it's standard. Front-loading, smoothing. But it's fraud if anyone looks long enough. A merger pushes everything into a new structure. By the time auditors catch up, the trail is cold, and the penalties are tolerable. My stomach tightened. And me? You're a variable, she said, wincing at the word. A smart one. A nurse who documents. A wife who might not smile on cue. If you sign those papers, you become a footnote. If you fight, you become a story. He can't risk either during negotiations. Does Evan know? Pieces, she said. He knows what Dad lets him know. The vending machine clunked. Nadia appeared with 2 bottled waters she hadn't paid for because the machine accidentally coughed them up. She slid one to me and one to Brooke with a grin that said, "I'm not leaving." Brooke didn't protest. She leaned in. There's something else. Grandma June, she didn't trust Dad. She changed parts of the family trust before she died. I don't know everything, but I overheard her lawyer mention protections for future great-grandchildren. My heart stuttered. Future, I repeated. Brooke nodded. If a great-grandchild was born, certain assets would be shielded. And their mother, that's you, might have temporary authority. Dad panicked when he realized your due date landed before the merger vote. Nadia whistled low. And that's why his briefcase showed up in a nursery. Brooke reached into her purse and set a thin plastic card on the table, face down like a gambler. Storage B12, she said. Off-site records. He thinks I don't know. I do. The night janitor's gossip. I didn't touch the card. Why help me? She met my eyes and, for the first time, looked like Evan, unguarded and human. Because Isla is my niece, she said simply. Because Dad will burn anyone to keep his crown, and one day he'll light me too. Because Grandma June whispered to me once that our family needed a different kind of courage. Nadia took the card, slid it into my hoodie pocket, and patted it like a talisman. We'll be careful, she said. Brooke stood, uncertainty flickering. Don't trust anyone, she said, eyes pleading. Not even me if Dad calls. He's persuasive. I took her hand. It was colder than mine. Thank you. She nodded, swallowed, and left, heels clicking a little too fast, like she was trying to outrun her last name. I looked at Nadia. Storage B12, I said. Nadia cracked her knuckles. I'll bring the comfortable shoes. If secrets had a smell, B12 reeked of bleach and toner. 2 hours later, after a nurse shift change and a promise to Priya that I wouldn't do anything ill-advised, I kissed Isla's soft crown and slipped into jeans and a hoodie that felt like a disguise. Nadia wheeled me to the elevator like a legitimate patient until the doors closed. Then we grinned at each other like girls sneaking into a movie. The security guard from earlier gave us a nod that said he'd seen stranger. The storage facility sat 6 blocks away, concrete and fluorescent where records go to mummify. Brooke's keycard pulsed green at the reader like it recognized the family DNA. We stepped into a corridor lined with units that all smelled the same. Paper ghosts and cleaning supplies. B12, Nadia whispered, pointing. Inside, shelves rose like book spines in a library written by pessimists. Boxes labeled in tidy rich person cursive, vendors, AF, Q3 ledgers, city contracts pending. I slid on gloves because evidence is shy and fingerprints are messy. Nadia kept time with a tiny flashlight and a prayer to Saint Rita, patron of impossible causes. We opened boxes and found numbers arranged into comforting lies. Duplicate ledgers, invoices stamped paid for subcontractors I'd never heard of. Names that sounded like random word generators. Sable Meridian, North Star Aggregates, Blue Line Urban. Timestamps that didn't add up. Like clocks set 5 minutes fast in one room and slow in another. We photographed everything, our phones gobbling truth. Then a folder labeled Community Redevelopment. East Side gave up something uglier. Photos of Richard shaking hands with a city inspector in a restaurant famous for no cameras. Someone had slipped, and someone else had printed it. Nadia whistled low. Bingo, she breathed. In the back, a smaller cabinet held family papers. Wills, amendments, the Hale family narrating itself in legal font. One envelope, thicker, wore a name that didn't belong to Richard. June E. Hale. Trust amendment, unfiled. My gloved fingers trembled as I broke the seal with a cautious swipe. Inside, language more human than the sterile ledgers. June's handwriting in the margins, notes like breadcrumbs. An amendment describing protections for any future great-grandchild. It specified that in the event of corporate malfeasance, my breath caught at the word, assets earmarked for that child would be shielded, and the child's mother would act as temporary trustee until the child reached majority. That mother would have veto power over any transaction that could imperil the child's stake. Nadia squeezed my arm. That means you. My name wasn't on the page, but Isla's arrival had written it there in invisible ink. I imagined June, sharp as glass, and kinder than her son deserved, sitting with her lawyer and drawing a circle around a baby who didn't exist yet. I felt seen by a woman I'd only known through framed photographs and cool stories told over holiday ham. We kept digging. A thin folder labeled Trust, escrow instruction drafts surfaced, with notes about confirmation by June's attorney, Harold Whitby, now retired. There were bank memos acknowledging receipt, then a sticky tab that said simply, On birth. Notify trustee per letter. Beneath it, a sealed ivory envelope, heavy with purpose, inked in looping script. Open upon Isla's birth. I froze. Time narrowed to the space between my fingers and that seal. Nadia's breath tickled my neck. This is it, she whispered. This is the fuse Camille smelled. I didn't open it. Not yet. We photographed the front and back, the box, the shelf tag, each angle like we were making a map for people who would accuse us of lying later. I slid the envelope into a rigid folder and tucked it under my hoodie, against my heartbeat. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Nadia clicked off the flashlight. We held our breath. A cart squeaked past, the night attendant humming off-key. I counted to 10, then 20, then the number of times I'd been underestimated by men in suits. When the sound faded, we restored everything we'd touched to the way we'd found it, minus the truths now living in our phones and against my ribs. We slipped out, locked B12, and stepped into the night air that smelled suddenly clean. Nadia laughed, shaky and wild. We just robbed a dragon. No, I said, my hand over the envelope. We just rescued a secret. The dead don't raise their voices, unless we finally listen. Back in my room, a hush had settled over the ward that only comes after midnight, the kind where even machines seem to whisper. Isla slept, mouth open, tiny breaths counting time more gently than any clock. I held the envelope like it might dissolve and asked Melinda to witness as I opened it. She nodded, closed the door, and stood by the window with a clipboard. The seal lifted with a sigh. Inside lay two things, a notarized letter on thick cream paper and a USB drive as small as a promise. My hands shook, then steadied. I unfolded the letter. To the mother of my first great-grandchild, it began in June's hand, neat and certain. You don't know me well, perhaps, and if you do, forgive my formality. Old women trust paper more than conversation. If you are reading this, then a new life has arrived, and with it the chance to correct an old mistake. She wrote about loving her son and fearing the man he'd become when the company taught him that strength meant never saying sorry. She described years of smoothing, of arrangements, of civic pride calcified into entitlement. She wrote about money like it was a river that needed banks, and how Richard kept trying to flood towns to build bigger boats. I suspected malfeasance I could not prove while breathing, the letter admitted. So I prepared protections that would activate when the future arrived in a blanket. She defined malfeasance plainly: fraud, bribery, self-dealing, and named the bank that would confirm receipt of her instructions. She attached a copy of an amendment instructing that upon the birth of the first great-grandchild, a protective trust would activate, shielding that child's stake and appointing the child's mother as interim trustee until majority with veto over corporate actions that threatened the asset. She had initialed each page, old-fashioned and fierce. I looked up at Melinda. She looked back, eyes shiny. I plugged the USB into a hospital-issue laptop Priya had borrowed from the education room. The screen flickered. A sitting room, afternoon light, lace curtains, June, silver hair pinned, pearls resting on a will that had muscled up. She looked into the camera like she was looking through time. "If you're watching," she said, voice like a melody learned young, "then hello, dear. I choose you because you chose my grandson for love, not land. I choose you because you work with your hands and your head and your heart, and you understand that paperwork is only as moral as the people who sign it." She described the activation conditions. She named Harold Whitby as the confirming attorney. She listed account numbers that made Melinda's eyebrows climb. She warned that Richard would try to intimidate, flatter, or starve me into compliance. "Be polite if it serves you," June said, a smile ghosting her mouth. "But remember that manners are not morals. Protect my family from my son." The video ended. The room remembered to breathe. Nadia made the sign of the cross with dramatic flair, then wiped her eyes. Grandma June didn't come to play. Come. I emailed Camille the scans, the video, the photos from B12. She called within minutes, her voice a quiet thunder. "This is real," she said. "I'll verify the bank confirmations at first light and track Whitby. We'll file a counter-petition for a restraining order and trust recognition. Lauren, this changes everything." I looked at Isla. "It changes nothing about how much I love her," I said, "but it changes how loudly I get to say it." Evan slipped in then, face splotchy from a nap that did nothing. He saw the laptop, the letter, the envelope resting like a crown on the tray. "What is that?" he asked. "Your grandmother," I said, "saving you from your father." He sat, slowly, like a man trying to lower himself into truth. I handed him the letter. He read, then read again, and the bruise on his hand seemed suddenly small compared to the bruise across his inheritance. "Lauren," he whispered, eyes wet. "I'm so sorry." "Then be brave," I said, "with me." Isla sighed in her sleep, as if approving a contract written before she knew words. The night outside thickened toward morning. Somewhere, Richard was sleeping or planning. In here, an old woman's voice had built us a bridge. June's voice ends. "Lauren, if you're hearing this, protect my family from my son." Power hates daylight. The sun bled into the hospital blinds like someone had dragged a highlighter across the sky. Camille arrived with coffee and certainties. She'd already spoken to the private banker named in June O's letter and secured a provisional confirmation. The instructions existed, were logged, and would be honored unless a court said otherwise. She'd also left 2 voicemails for the retired attorney, Harold Whitby, and emailed his old paralegal. Her eyes were bright with the kind of alertness that makes bureaucracies nervous. "Step 1, she said, flipping a legal pad. "We file an emergency counter-petition. Temporary restraining order against Richard from contacting you outside counsel. Immediate recognition of the protective trust's activation. Injunction stopping any merger or board vote that could affect the child's stake until forensic accounting. Step 2. Preservation notices go to Hale & Son, the city's redevelopment office, and the bank's compliance division. Step 3. An anonymous package goes to the Public Integrity Unit." "Anonymous?" Nadia asked, chin up. "Anonymous," Camille repeated. "Until we're ready for our names on a podium." She nodded toward the laptop. "Send me the full B12 dump. I want every duplicate ledger, every ghost invoice, every photo. No edits, no color correction. Raw." I forwarded the files with a pulse that thudded in my throat. Evan stood by the window, staring at the parking deck like it might offer absolution. When he turned, his face had the brittle resolve of a man who just realized the locks on his life belonged to someone else. "I'll testify," he said, "about the pressure for a postnup, about the merger timeline, about the threats." Camille's gaze softened a fraction. "Good, but know this. Your father will try to make you regret growing a spine." Evan nodded. "He's been renting mine for years. It's time to evict him." The door cracked open, and a detective with tired shoulders stepped in, flashing a badge. "Lieutenant Marcus Troy, public corruption," he said. "I got an anonymous tip with documents. Thought I'd introduce myself in case more mail arrives." Nadia coughed delicately and studied her cuticles. "Lieutenant," Camille said, "we expect there's off-site storage and server log manipulation. We'll have a preservation order shortly. In the meantime, consider this a courtesy heads-up." He took notes, eyes moving like a scanner. "City inspector's name showed up more than once," he said, tapping his notebook. "If this sticks, someone flips. They always do." "Inspector Delaney?" Nadia offered, innocent as a choir. "He likes the Bouillabaisse coat, doesn't he?" Troy didn't smile, but something like it lived behind his eyes. "Noted." After he left, Camille slid a stack of papers toward me. "Sign here and here," she said. "This authorizes me to file on your behalf, and to act regarding the trust." My hand didn't shake. The pen moved like it had been practicing for this day. When we finished, she checked her watch. Courthouse opens at 8. I'll have us on a judge's radar by 9. With luck, we get a chambers hearing by Monday. Monday, I echoed, feeling the word like a scheduled storm. Between now and then, Camille said, we keep documenting. No direct conversations with Richard. All contact through counsel. Melinda, thank you for hospital documentation. Melinda nodded. I've added notes to the chart. Social work has filed an incident report regarding attempted coercion. Camille's phone buzzed. She read the preview, lips curving. Bank's compliance officer emailed. They've placed a soft flag on Hale & Son accounts tied to the family trust. It's not a freeze, but it's a seatbelt. If Richard slams the brakes, his dashboard will light up. Evan exhaled, shaky. He'll know. Let him, Camille said. Predators hate mirrors. We'll hold one up. I fed Isla, her tiny jaw working in determined rhythm, and thought of June S. video. How she looked into a future where I was tired and afraid and told me to be stubborn. Stubbornness is just love with a backbone, my mother used to say. I finally understood. At noon, Camille emailed the filed motions. By 2, an assistant clerk called. The judge had scheduled an emergency chambers hearing for Monday at 9:30 a.m. The calendar invite glowed like a minute hand ticking louder. Nadia fist-pumped. Melinda brought celebratory jello. Evan kissed Isla's forehead and then mine. It was an apology, a vow, and a plea to keep going. I texted Brooke the update. She replied with a single word. Careful. I typed back. Always. When evening slid across the windows, the room dimmed to the color of waiting. I tucked Isla into her bassinet and smoothed her hat. The hallway hummed with wheels and whispers. Somewhere Richard was rehearsing a smile for the cameras. I hoped it hurt. The judge schedules an emergency chambers hearing for Monday. I didn't want a hero. I wanted a husband. Knight pressed against the window like a patient asking for help. Evan stood there, shoulders bowed, the way he used to stand after college practices when he iced his knees and pretended he wasn't a hurting. He turned, eyes glassy, a boy and a man sharing one face. Lo, he said, I have to say some things out loud. Then say them. I answered, softer than I felt. He sat at the edge of the recliner, hands open, bruised knuckles up like a confession. When I was 24, I crashed Dad's classic Porsche into a divider at 2 a.m. I was drunk. He had it towed before the cops arrived and called a fixer. The story became a hit-and-run vandalism. I promised him I'd do anything to make it right. He swallowed and kept going, words gathering courage. A year later, there were pictures. Me at a bachelor party. Nothing criminal, but stupid. And he had the raw files. He said he'd manage them if I showed I could be managed. I let him write my calendar. I let him choose my friends. I let him rewrite the word love until it meant obedience. The silence afterward was a room with no furniture. I watched him sit in it. He winced at his own memory, then lifted his head. Then I met you, he said. A whisper growing teeth. You asked questions no one had asked me. You laughed like the world's punchline belonged to you. You told me I could be a good man even if I'd been a coward. I believed you. I still do. I felt a shard of anger slip free, less jagged than earlier, more honest. So why today? Because he said the merger would collapse if there was marital noise, Evan replied. Because he dangled the CFO job like a life raft and told me you were the water. Because I forgot the difference between his voice and my fear. Nadia hummed from her chair, not looking up from a Sudoku she wasn't filling in. Fear does great ventriloquism, she said. Evan leaned forward. I can't undo the morning, but I can do the next hour. I will testify in chambers. I will say I was coerced. I will admit the past. I will stand next to you and not behind him. Behind me, I corrected gently. Beside me when you earn it. Behind me until then. He nodded, accepting the geometry. Behind you, he said, until you tell me to move. I handed him June's amendment and the letter again. Watched the sentences carve new grooves in his understanding. Your grandmother believed I would protect her family, I said. Not your father. You, Brooke, Isla, even the parts of you you're ashamed of. But I can't do that if you're working for both sides. I'm not, he said. Not anymore. My phone buzzed. Brooke. He knows about B12. Be careful. He asked me if I've been helpful. I lied badly. He's coming back tonight. My stomach tightened. He's coming. Evan stood. Let him, he said, a line drawn in a voice that hadn't had one all day. I'm done being the project he remodels. I looked at him. Really looked. He was still the man who derubbed my back through contractions and cried when Isla wailed her first hello. He was also the man who'd chosen silence when volume mattered. Love is not blindness. It's sight with commitment. I chose to keep seeing. Okay, I said. But hear me. If you flinch tomorrow, if you choose his crown over our child's crib, I will be your ex-wife by lunchtime. He flinched at that, and then he straightened. Understood. Nadia finally looked up. I'll bring popcorn for Monday. We all laughed. It felt like opening a window. Then my phone vibrated again, the sound of a curtain pulling on a stage. A message from Brooke. No punctuation, all urgency. He's on his way to the hospital now. 2 minutes out. Elevator. My phone buzzed. Brooke. He knows we opened B12. He's coming. Some knocks sound like endings. The knock landed on the door with the confidence of a man who thinks doors exist to be opened for him. Richard stepped in, wearing contrition like a tailored coat. His voice was set to public apology. His hands empty, which only made them more dangerous. Lauren, he said softly, I owe you an apology. Today was ill-judged. Nadia muttered, put it in writing, and slid her phone to record, screen dark as a wink. Richard moved to the chair near the door, obeying Melinda's earlier boundary as if that made him civilized. Evan, he said, inclining his head. Son. Evan didn't respond. He stood behind me like a borrowed wall. Richard clasped his hands. Let's start again. You're tired. Emotions are high. I've come with a better proposal. He reached into his coat and withdrew a thin folder, pale blue, friendly. A settlement that gives you a generous stipend, a townhouse in Brookline, and complete privacy. In exchange, you will waive any claim to the family trust or corporate governance and agree to a discreet separation that we'll frame as amicable. I stared. You came at 2 a.m. to buy a bedtime story. He smiled, earnest, to offer a dignified path. For all of us. Where's the part where I get my child? I asked. You'd have joint custody, he said smoothly, and we'd ensure Isla wants for nothing, except her mother's backbone, Nadia said, too cheerfully. Richard's eyes flicked to her, then back. Lauren, consider the alternative. Court. Headlines. Strain. The company suffers. Employees suffer. The city suffers. This is a way to be generous. Your generosity has line items, I said. He leaned in a fraction, lowering his voice like we were co-conspirators. You're smart. You see the machine. Help me keep it running while we fix a few gears. By erasing myself, I said. By adapting, he corrected. He glanced at Evan. Your husband understands adaptation. Evan's jaw worked. Don't, he said, quiet and lethal. Don't use me to sell her on betrayal. Richard smoothed the folder, then tried a different bait. Those late-night calls from doctors. Unseemly. The texts, the optics, the whispering. I can make that vanish. Nadia rolled her eyes. You can make your lies vanish, sure. Our shift app will keep dinging. He ignored her. And the inspector, Delaney? He's a good man with a family. Don't drag him into this. It won't end well for anyone. There it was. A name and a caution wrapped around a threat. Nadia's phone drank it all. I tilted my head. Timestamp swaps are hard to defend in front of a jury, I said lightly. His eyes narrowed. Careful. Camille chose that moment to enter like a plot twist, cool air following her. She held a sheet of paper with enough legal letterhead to make a bishop nervous. Mr. Hale, she said, you are hereby on notice that further contact with my client outside counsel will be considered harassment and potentially witness tampering. Leave. He laughed softly. At 2 a.m., we're calling it witness tampering? At any hour, she said. We're calling it exactly that. Richard rose, irritation deforming his apology mask. For a heartbeat, the real man peeked through. Sharp, impatient, sure of his entitlement. He looked at Isla, then at me, and recalibrated. We'll speak Monday, he said. Trustee. Security. summoned by Melinda's earlier note, appeared like magic. 2 guards who had learned the art of escorting without escalating. Richard let himself be shepherded toward the hallway, smile reattached for any camera that might blink awake. As he crossed the threshold, he turned back, eyes steady, voice pitched to reach only me. "See you Monday, trustee." The door closed. The recording saved. Camille exhaled and dropped into a chair. "Good," she said. "He just handed us admissions on a tray." Evan rubbed his face with both hands. "I hate him," he whispered, then corrected himself, courage tightening. "I hate what I've let him be." I lifted Isla, her warmth a fact no filing could change, and pressed my cheek to her hair. Monday waited like a drumbeat. I counted heartbeats instead. As he's led away, Richard says, "See you Monday, trustee." Courtrooms smell like coffee and consequences. By 9:10 a.m., the hallway outside Judge Salazar's chambers pulsed with whispered strategies and expensive cologne. Camille wore navy and inevitability. I wore a clean dress that didn't try to impress, hair pulled back like a nurse reporting for duty. Evan's suit fit like a regret tailored into resolve. Richard arrived with 3 attorneys, and a smile lacquered to gleam under courthouse lights. Inside chambers, the judge's space felt like a well-organized mind. Books lined the walls. A single plant seemed to be thriving, which I took as a good omen. Judge Salazar glanced at Isla in her carrier, then at me. "Congratulations," she said, not unkindly, and gestured for us to sit. Richard's lead attorney began his performance. Concern for corporate stability, fear of public spectacle, devotion to the innocent child. He used the word brand twice, which made the judge's eyebrow rise a millimeter. Camille stood and rearranged the oxygen in the room. She presented June's notarized letter, the amendment, and a preliminary confirmation from the bank. She offered Melinda's documentation of coercion in the hospital room. She summarized, efficiently, the contents of storage B12 without dramatics. Duplicate ledgers, ghost vendors, timestamp anomalies. She didn't say fraud. She said irregularities subject to investigation. Judges like verbs they can measure. Richard interjected with charm sharpened into accusation. "Ms. Price has been unstable," he said, and I felt the old heat crawl my spine. "She refuses reasonable settlement, appears to have inappropriate relationships with physicians, and lacks the temperament for fiduciary responsibility." Camille didn't blink. "Evidence?" He paused, then gestured vaguely. "We're compiling." "While he compiles," Camille said, "we ask for 3 things. Recognition that June Hale, S. protective trust activated upon the child, S. birth. A temporary injunction freezing corporate actions that could affect the child's stake, and an order restraining Mr. Hale from contacting my client outside counsel." Judge Salazar leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, did you present divorce papers to Ms. Price in her hospital room within 24 hours of childbirth?" Richard smiled thinly. "I presented options." "Did you threaten to pursue emergency custody if she refused to sign?" the judge asked. "I warned of possible outcomes," he said. "Did you imply that the morality clause of an unsigned postnuptial agreement would impact custody?" He hesitated. "I referenced expectations," he said. The judge's plant continued to thrive. "Mr. Hale, sit down." Camille called Evan. He stood, swore in, and began unspooling years of compliance. He told the truth about the post-nup pressure, the fixer, the photos, the threats tied to the merger. He did not cry. He did not excuse. He named the fear out loud, and then stepped away from it. Richard's jaw worked. His attorney objected twice. The judge overruled both. When Evan finished, Camille played a slice of Nadia's recording. Richard's timestamp swaps boast. His mention of Inspector Delaney. His offer to purchase my silence with a townhouse and a stipend. The sound was clear, the kind that makes jurors lean. Judge Salazar steepled her fingers. "Mr. Hale," she said, "this court recognizes the provisional activation of June E. Hale's protective trust, subject to final confirmation by Mr. Whitby. Effective immediately, no corporate action affecting that trust may proceed without this court's review. Further, you are restrained from contacting Ms. Price outside counsel." Richard inhaled to protest. The judge lifted a hand. "Save it for a hearing with more oxygen." She signed the temporary injunction. The clerk's stamp thunked like a gavel. I felt my breath return in a way I hadn't noticed it had left. As we stood to go, Richard leaned close enough that I could see the shave line on his jaw. His smile didn't crack, but it pulsed, and his whisper slithered between my ribs. "You still don't have the signature that matters." I met his eyes. "Watch me find it." Richard leans in and whispers, "You still don't have the signature that matters." He was right. I needed a signature. He just forgot whose. Whitby didn't answer his phone, but his old paralegal texted Camille a clue. Lakeside, 2 hours north. He feeds ducks at dawn. We drove in Camille's car, Brooke following in a borrowed sedan with sunglasses and nerves. The lake appeared like an apology, quiet and blue, framed by maples just beginning to think about turning. A cabin squatted near the water, its porch wrapped in the smell of coffee and old books. Harold Whitby opened the door before we knocked. He was leaner than I expected, with eyes like someone who had watched too many men bluff and too many women pay for it. "I hoped you'd come before he did," he said, waving us in. June was clear that speed matters. Inside, everything had a label and a story. He poured coffee into heavy mugs and set a plate of butter cookies between us like a peace offering. June hired me 30 years ago to draft her estate plan. 10 years ago, she revised it to account for her son's appetite. 5 years ago, she asked me to draft an amendment with teeth. I told her the family would hate it. She said families survive teeth. Camille slid the documents across his table. Harold adjusted his glasses, read, and nodded at each page like greeting an old friend. He reached into a banker's box and withdrew a slim, flat package wrapped in legal twine. He untied it, with a care that felt like prayer. "These are the original wet ink copies," he said, laying out the amendment with June's looping signature and the notary seal pressed deep. He added an affidavit he'd drafted the week before she died. In the event of the first great-grandchild's birth, deliver a sealed instruction to the child's mother, hereinafter interim trustee. He slid a small, white envelope toward me, weightless as destiny. My name wasn't on it, but June's intention pressed through like embossing. Harold tapped the envelope. "June made me promise to say this line when I handed it over." He smiled, grief soft. "Open it when he smiles at you." "The he?" Brooke asked, voice a whisper. "Dad?" Harold's eyes twinkled. June preferred pronouns that felt like knuckles. We laughed, a cracked sound that let in air. I slipped the envelope into my bag with reverence and fear. Camille photographed every page, every seal, every corner of Harold's kitchen. He signed a certification with a pen that looked like it only wrote truths. Brooke pressed her palms to the table, inhaling like she could breathe her grandmother back into the room. "I'll testify," Harold said. June anticipated resistance. She collected confirmations from the bank and recorded a brief video attestation. "I have it on a thumb drive." He handed it to Camille, who held it like a relic. "This," she said, "is the signature that matters." We thanked Harold until thank you felt too small. He walked us to the porch, where the lake made quiet promises. Ducks formed a committee near the shore. Harold tossed them breadcrumbs with the satisfaction of a man who'd chosen the right side of a story a long time ago. On the drive back, Brooke spoke without looking at me. "I'm sorry for every time I made you feel like a guest," she said. "You're the only one in our family who didn't audition for love." "Apology accepted," I said. "Conditional on snacks at every meeting." She huffed a laugh. "Done." My phone buzzed. A news alert. Hale and Son to address merger rumors at noon press conference. Richard had chosen his battlefield. Cameras, microphones, optics. He'd smile, and the city would confuse charm with virtue. I felt the envelope thrum in my bag like a quiet drum. Camille turned onto the highway. "Then we bring our own stage," she said. The traffic thickened with people going places they believed were important. I touched the bag again, thinking of June's instruction, of Harold's porch, of ducks voting with their feet. The world loves a show. I had a prop. I had a line. I had a grandmother-in-law who'd reached from the past to steady my hand. Harold says, "Open it when he smiles at you." If truth had a stage, it looked like microphones and shaking hands. City Hall's steps were a bristle of tripods and shoulders. Reporters practiced questions into wind that lifted hair and headlines. A Hale and Son banner hung behind a podium flanked by ferns that looked as nervous as the interns guarding them. Richard stood off to the side, hands folded, the benevolent statesman polishing his halo on the crowd's curiosity. Brooke and I waited near the back, Camille between us like a metronome keeping our courage on beat. Evan hovered just behind, a line in the sand shaped like a man. Lieutenant Troy loitered near a municipal pillar, pretending not to watch, the way cops pretend not to breathe when truth lines up in their sights. The company's communications director, crisp suit, crisper smile, tapped the mic. "Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Mr. Hale will make a brief statement and then take a few questions." Richard approached the podium and slid his smile into place. "Our city is our partner," he began, voice measured, familiar. "Recent rumors about our merger and our practices are unfounded distractions. Hale and Son has built schools, hospitals, and bridges with integrity for 4 generations." He paused to let the cameras applaud without clapping. "As for my family," he continued, chin dipping toward contrition, "my concern is, and always will be, my granddaughter's well-being. We will manage private matters privately. I ask that you respect that." A hand shot up. "Mr. Hale, did you present divorce papers to your daughter-in-law in the hospital?" A chuckle. Paternal. Families have difficult conversations. Ours are no exception. Another voice. "Are you under investigation for contract irregularities?" Richard spread his hands. "We welcome any review. We have nothing to hide." "Behind us," Nadia whispered. "He's rehearsed this in a mirror since kindergarten." Camille squeezed my elbow once. "Wait," the squeeze said. "Timing is a scalpel." A local anchor with ruthless lashes leaned forward. "Is it true your company billed the city for pre-development services on projects that never broke ground?" "We perform preliminary work," Richard said smoothly. "Feasibility studies, community outreach, early investment that safeguards taxpayer dollars." Lieutenant Troy's pen hovered. The comms director scanned the crowd, ready to cut questions before they bled. "And about the inspector," a blogger yelled, phone extended like a wand. "Inspector Delaney?" Richard's smile didn't flinch. "We cooperate with all city officials." He pivoted, found the lens he loved, and let his face soften. "I became a grandfather this week. It has reminded me that legacies are built on love, not noise. I will do right by my granddaughter. That is my promise to this city." Brooke exhaled. "There," she murmured, voice thin. The smile. The envelope in my bag felt suddenly heavier, like a bell waiting for its rope. Harold's line rang in my head. "Open it when he smiles at you." He was smiling at everyone, but the smile was for me too. The same one that tried to housebreak me in a hospital room. The same one that had bullied cities into nodding. The comms director stepped up, ready to declare victory. "One last question." A young reporter seized the opening. "If there's nothing to hide, will you authorize a full independent audit before the merger?" Richard's eyes flashed amusement. "We're always audited," he said. "We're proud of our books." Cameras angled, microphones leaned. The crowd's hum rose, a hive deciding which direction to swarm. Camille's hand released my elbow. "Go," the absent said. I stepped forward, the space parting around me with the kind of politeness reserved for women who look like they might ruin a man. Afternoon. Evan moved with me, not ahead, not behind, aligned. "Mr. Hale," I called, voice steady enough to stand on. "About promises." He turned, smiling directly at me now, and I saw it. The precise curve at the corner, the dimples weaponized. "Lauren," he said warmly, "this is hardly—" I reached into my bag. Richard turns to me before the cameras and finally smiles. I remembered Harold's words and reached into my bag. Silence isn't quiet. Its anticipation stretched thin. When I brought out the white envelope, cameras inhaled as one organism. The seal was intact, June's script elegant and stubborn across the front. I held it high, then lowered it to the podium's edge like a surgeon placing an instrument where it could be seen. "This," I said, "is a sealed instruction from June E. Hale, the matriarch of Hale and Son, to be opened upon the birth of her first great-grandchild, my daughter, Isla." A murmur rippled. Richard's smile paused. A fraction, the frame skipping. I slid a nail under the seal and opened the envelope. Inside, a slim thumb drive labeled in neat ink, a notarized addendum, a board resolution already pre-signed by June, and a power of instruction addressed to the family bank. I placed the thumb drive on the podium and unfolded the addendum so the notary's seal shone like a coin. "June's video addendum," I said, tapping the drive, "names me, Lauren Price, as irrevocable interim trustee of Isla's Protective Trust, with veto authority over any corporate action threatening her stake. This pre-signed board resolution transfers emergency veto power to the trustee upon the birth of the first great-grandchild, and this power of instruction directs the bank to honor trustee directives immediately. The comms director tried to cut me off. "Ma'am, this isn't—" Camille stepped to a cluster of microphones and spoke with calibrated volume. "Copies are being distributed to the press and delivered to the district attorney AS office and Lieutenant Troy of public corruption." Nadia and Brooke moved like choreography, handing packets, each tabbed, each page numbered, to outstretched hands. Reporters became archivists in a heartbeat, the scent of paper and victory mingling. Lieutenant Troy accepted his set, eyes flicking over the header. He didn't smile, but the corners of his mouth forgot to frown. I continued even, relentless. "There is also a handwritten note. If Richard contests, deliver a copy to the DA. Consider it delivered." Richard shifted his weight. "This is theater," he said lightly. "Staged." "Staged like a press conference?" I asked. Cameras laughed for him, then at him. He tried to retake ground. "June loved the company," he said, turning to the crowd. "She would never hamstring it." "She loved her family more," I replied. Camille raised the thumb drive. "June's video will be uploaded to a public link in 1 hour. Until then, we request that the bank honor the power of instruction and that any merger proceedings be suspended pending a forensic audit overseen by the court." A reporter waved a packet. "This board resolution, if valid, gives the trustee effective veto right now. Ms. Price, do you intend to use it?" I met the camera. "Yes." Richard's smile fractured. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "Protecting my child from your debts." Another voice from the press pack. "Mr. Hale, did you discuss timestamp swaps with Inspector Delaney?" Richard scoffed. "Ridiculous." Nadia called sweetly. "We have audio." And a dozen other voices echoed. "Audio?" The hive swarmed. Questions buzzed, hands stretched. Phones were a forest. Richard reached toward the podium, toward the papers, toward the drive, the motion dressed as paternal concern. "Lauren, be sensible," he murmured, low enough for microphones to wonder. "You don't want to burn the house your daughter will live in." "I'd rather rebuild it without termites," I said. He lunged a half step, instinct outrunning strategy, and the microphones caught everything. The scrape of his shoe, the hiss of his breath, the comms director's gasp, my "do not touch me," firm as a door slamming. Security stepped in, practiced and courteous, a choreography of de-escalation that read as guilt to anyone with eyes. Lieutenant Troy raised his voice once. "Mr. Hale, step back." Richard obeyed, but the damage was done. The optic he feared most, losing control on camera, had been printed onto the day. I gathered the remaining copies, handed another set to Troy, and turned to the press. "For the record," I said, "the trustee instructs the bank to place an immediate hold on executive disbursements tied to merger activities, pending court review." A beat, 100 pens scribbled. Richard lunged for the papers, and the microphones caught everything. Kings don't fall. They unravel. The bank moved faster than press cycles. Within hours, a notice pinged to counsel. Per June S. power of instruction and Judge Salazar S. injunction, executive authority tied to merger expenditures was suspended. The board, who had spent years absorbing Richard's weather, read the wind and found umbrellas elsewhere. 2 directors requested an emergency session. One resigned, for health reasons, that looked suspiciously like, for immunity. Lieutenant Troy served a warrant on Hale & Sons servers just after lunch. The IT director, A.S. brave attempt at slow-walking access, died under the weight of a Judge S. signature. Backups coughed up timestamp anomalies that looked like toddlers had been allowed to play with grown-up clocks. Storage B12's lock clicked under an evidence tech's patient hands. Boxes with tidy cursive labels took their first ride in a chain-of-custody van. Inspector Delaney folded first. Faced with photos of dinners he couldn't expense, and messages that read like bribes practicing euphemism, he chose cooperation. He named meetings. He named restaurants. He named phone calls where Richard said words that men only say when they believe walls can listen. Walls had listened. So had Nadia's recording. Richard held a second press avail on the steps of his headquarters, but the angle had changed. Cameras framed him tighter. Reporters' voices carried less deference, more teeth. When asked about the injunction, he said, temporary. When asked about the trustee's veto, he said, overreach. When asked about Delaney, he said, a friend. The clip played on repeat with graphics that made friendship look like a felony. Camille worked the phones like chess, notifying vendors of the freeze to prevent creative invoice avalanches. She conferred with the bank's compliance team and Judge Salazar's clerk. She drafted a memo to employees assuring payroll continuity and warning against data destruction. Brooke recorded a video to staff, her voice steady. We will cooperate fully. Our work matters. Our integrity will too. The video went internal viral. Fields crews, seldom asked for their opinions, texted one another versions of, about time. At home that night, Isla slept on my chest while the television narrated the family we were no longer pretending to be. Evan cooked pasta badly and set the smoke detector off, then fanned it with a towel, swearing under his breath with a tenderness that made me want to forgive him twice, and then once more for myself. He turned the flame down and met my eyes. Thank you, he said, for not handing my life back to the man who broke it. I didn't do this for you, I said honestly. I did it for her, and for me. You're welcome to stand in the cleared space. Don't fill it with apologies. Fill it with work. He nodded, chastened and bright. Yes, ma'am. The next morning, the DA's office announced charges: fraud, bribery, falsification of business records. The indictment read like a biography no one would buy. Richard was perp-walked with dignity only money can rent, jaw clenched, eyes daring the lens to blink. He made bail in hours, but the story didn't release him. It clung like smoke. In a boardroom that suddenly felt larger, the directors voted. Brooke was named interim CEO, subject to trustee veto on structural decisions until audit completion. She accepted with a gravity that would have made June smile. She asked field supervisors to submit anonymous lists of how to do better. It turned out that men who pour concrete know how to pour truth when asked. Evan stood behind me at the press announcement, one hand at the small of my back, not guiding, not resting, present. He spoke briefly. I failed my wife. I failed my family. I'm choosing better now. He credited me for protecting Isla and June's legacy. Cameras looked for me. I let them. Not as a conquest, an anchor. The city exhaled, a complicated relief. Then the quiet after clamor asked its own question, the one that lands in kitchens when judges go home and headlines rest. But justice asks a price. Can a marriage built under blackmail survive? The next time a Hale walked into my room, he brought daisies and an apology. Weeks later, Autumn had cracked open its paint box and spilled gold on the sidewalks. Richard faced arraignment. His attorneys wore exhaustion like cologne. Plea talk hung in the air, cautious as fog. The company kept building. Real things, measured in inches and sweat, while auditors wrote their own thick gospel. The bank, now my reluctant pen pal, sent monthly confirmations like clocked prayers. Evan started therapy. Not the kind where you pay to rehearse excuses, but the kind where you sit with the version of yourself you're ashamed of and invite him to tell the story without flinching. He came home wrecked and softer. He stopped performing contrition and started washing bottles at 3 a.m. without announcing it. He took the stroller for long walks where he spoke to Isla about how he would earn his fatherhood one diaper at a time. On a Sunday that smelled like cinnamon toast, Camille brought over a document that looked nothing like Richard's gifts. It was our post-nup. Ours, not his. Mutual respect, mutual custody, full financial transparency. A clause that barred extended family interference. Another that required couples therapy during major decisions. A sunset provision that converted our agreement into a trust-friendly estate plan if we made it 5 years without invoking nuclear options. We signed on the porch, Isla gurgling like a notary in footy pajamas. Here's the truth, I told Evan as the ink dried. I'm not promising forever. I'm promising today. Tomorrow we earn. He nodded. I'll bring lunch. Brooke came by with daisies and spreadsheets. She asked for the trustee's blessing to establish an ethics committee with external oversight and field crew representation. I said yes because June's ghost would have boxed my ears if I didn't. We drafted a whistleblower policy with actual teeth and pay protection. We published vendor lists and invited public comment that we promised to read without defensiveness. The comments hurt in the way cleaning a wound hurts. Then they did what cleaning does. They kept us from rotting. Nadia filmed me reading bedtime stories for Isla, so she could know her mother's voice when TikTok steals the rest of us. She moved into a new apartment with a window that knew how to hold morning light and taped a baby photo to her fridge, even though I told her she was ridiculous. "Aunties are ridiculous," she announced. "It's law." Melinda visited with a casserole and gossip that tasted like victory. Priya sent a photo of a new hospital policy titled, "Postpartum Legal Protections." No legal documents presented within 48 hours of delivery without patient counsel present. I cried quietly. In the kitchen where sunlight and onion sizzles made it safe. One afternoon, Evan knocked on Isla's nursery door with a bouquet of daisies laced with baby's breath. "I brought flowers," he said. Smile careful, like he was approaching a skittish deer. "And a question." I looked up from the rocking chair. "Ask. Would you consider a walk?" he said. "Just us. No lawyers, no headlines. I'll carry the diaper bag in your anger." I put on a sweater and my boundaries and let him hold the door. We walked under maples practicing confetti. He told me about therapy homework that had him drafting apologies to people he'd disappointed, and then mailing the ones that mattered. He said he understood if I chose to leave later, that his work was not contingent on my forgiveness. "Good," I said. "Do it because it's right, not because it's rewarded." We stopped at a park bench where a plaque read, "For June, who believed in bridges." I laughed. The universe is tacky. Isla hiccuped and smiled, the involuntary kind that makes parents write poems. I didn't write a poem. I kissed her forehead and rested my cheek there. I let myself imagine an ordinary future, not the movie, the daily. Back home, daisies on the table, stew on the stove, the email light blinked. A message from a stranger with a familiar last name. "I worked under your father-in-law. Thank you for the oxygen." I closed my laptop and chose stew over applause. If you were me, would you stay and rebuild, or go and start fresh with Isla? Tell me below, and don't forget to subscribe for part 2, the day Richard's secrets came knocking again.